also Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'll tell you more about them in just a moment. Also, real quick, you can probably tell this is not, things look a little bit different, a little bit weird. I currently, at the time of this portion of the recording, I do not have internet, and so I'm having to record this a little bit differently than I normally do. Hopefully the sound quality and even the video quality look as similar as it normally does, or at least close enough to the original product that I normally like to give you. But this is just what we got to do. I'm gonna keep these segments short, just in case it ends up not being whenever I'm editing this, in case it doesn't end up being in the quality that I want it to be. So this is kind of a bit of an experiment to see how this works out. But on tap today, Mitchell Paige, as always, recapping Indiana's big win over Iowa and also looking ahead to the Oregon game. Awesome conversation, as always. I feel like our conversations get better and better and more fun each week. Also, Dustin Schutte returning to the show for the first time since we talked about the Indiana Pacers and their deep run, really all the way to the NBA Finals, coming up short in Game 7. Glad to have him back on, talking Big Ten football, among some other things. So 2 really good conversations on tap for you all today, and I hope you guys enjoy. So we're going to go ahead and get straight into that. I was going to get into a few other things at the end, but because of the wonkiness of this episode, I'm just going to keep it simple today. So we're just going to do the 2 guest segments, and then we'll quickly run through some non-rev scores, and then also the Colts and stuff like that. Just very quick. So this will be probably significantly shorter than the last few episodes, so if that's something that makes you upset, then I'm sorry, but we're doing our best here. So, but before we get into our first segment with Mitchell Paige, I'm going to continue to talk to you about, I'm going to talk to you real quick about Academy Sports and Outdoors. They carry all the gear you need from top brands, all at prices you'll love, and now shopping at Academy is more convenient than ever. They offer free assembly on in-store purchases on most bikes and grills, plus free and easy curbside pickup on academy.com orders. You can also save even more by opening an Academy Sports and Outdoors credit card. You're getting 5% off future purchases when you are approved. Save time and money at Academy Sports and Outdoors. And as always, have fun out there. All right, joining us now for our weekly chat, it is Mitchell Paige. Welcome back to In Touch with Indiana Sports, as always.
What's up? 5-0, baby.
5-0, about to play 5-0 Oregon in a couple of weeks. But before that, this Iowa game, man. I think this is, outside of the Michigan game last year, and of course, Ohio State and Notre Dame, I'm kind of putting that on its own island. This is the most stressed out that Indiana fans have had to be in a winning game since the Michigan game at home last year.
Yeah, and it was such a different feeling game. Michigan, it was nervy, but it didn't feel like Michigan really dominated the game. And it didn't feel like Iowa dominated the game either, but it just was really hard for us to find any rhythm. It was such an interesting watch. I want to say it was the most fun watch of the season, but that would be lying because I did.
Maybe the most satisfying ending.
Yes. That's a game that most teams lose when the other team plays the way they want to play. They muck it up. They just take long drives, even though the time we were talking before, the time of possession wasn't that skewed towards Iowa, but it just felt like we were always on defense. Indiana made the plays to win the game. And we can talk about the missed kick. We can talk about whatever we want. But when it was time to bow up, Mendoza made some big-time throws, backed up on his own end zone, threw that go into the corner 2 hole on like the 35-yard line going out. That was the best throw he made all day. Took a hit, delivered a shot over the middle to Elijah Surratt. I always say Caleb. I don't know why. And then obviously the game winner. There's so much good to take away from the game on both sides of the ball, in special teams, got another block punt. Just made so many winning plays on an afternoon that it felt like there was no winning to be done.
One thing that people talked a lot about with Curt Cignetti back right when he was hired at Indiana is not only was he winning everywhere that he went, but he won a lot of one-score games. Indiana's not been in more than 2 one-score games, if I'm not mistaken. I guess the Notre Dame game ended up being a one-score game when everything was all said and done. But again, putting that game on an island. The 2 games where Indiana's been in tight situations, the one I mentioned earlier, Michigan, and then this one against Iowa, he's 2-0 in. Everything else has been either a blowout in favor of the Hoosiers or, of course, the Ohio State game, which, of course, like I said earlier, kind of on its own island with Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So far, again, it's a very small sample size. Cignetti is showing that he can win multiple kinds of games, but he can also – he doesn't like to be in the muck-it-up type of games. I don't know if you noticed, he seems a little more animated when things are a lot more close. Like even when the game was in the middle of the first half, the camera would pan over to Cignetti, and you could tell there was a little more kind of nervous, anxious energy coming from him from what we normally see. Normally, he's just very stoic, sits on the sideline, and the faces are all the same. It's different versions of anger or displeasure, whatever you want to call it. The football robot that we've talked about in the past. Things felt different at the beginning of this game throughout the entirety of it. And when all was said and done, and a lot of things, not a lot, there were some things that had to go Indiana's way to give them the opportunity that they had in those final 2 minutes. But Indiana executed to near perfection to get where they needed to get to, because when they were on defense, after that interception that Fernando Mendoza threw late in the fourth quarter, I think a lot of people, myself included, thought that was kind of a death sentence. The pick, and that was a pretty long return. I thought Iowa was going to kind of try to run out the clock, kick a game-winning field goal as time expires. That's not what happened. Defense bowed up, as you mentioned, made them get off the field before the 2-minute warning, and Indiana has plenty of time after the missed field goal to they not take their time, but enough time to do a regular 2-minute drill, if you will. And then you finally have the explosive play that you mentioned earlier. Iowa sends the entire cavalry at Indiana. Fernando Mendoza sees it coming from the get-go, and Elijah Surratt makes him pay with, I think it was a 49-yard touchdown run. I don't have it right in front of me, but it was the only explosive play of the day for either side. And I guess long story short with all this, even though everything had to go right, Cignetti and the rest of the coaching staff in general, they followed everything to a T to put Indiana in this position to win. And Indiana's never had a staff like this before where they've been able to execute something like that.
Yeah, you have to imagine if you ask Kirk Ferentz on Friday, what do you want the game to look like? He'd probably describe exactly what happened, where everything feels rushed. You mentioned Cignetti feeling a little anxious. There just never was any rhythm on the offense. It's throws that usually get made that are off a little bit. It's runs that usually have a little bit bigger hole and get closed up a little tighter.
And not only that, you see their quarterback, who's kind of been a little pretty mid. He completes 8 or 9 passes in a row, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're starting to figure out their offense. They're getting confidence against a pretty good defense. And that was kind of where I think a lot of the worries began whenever you saw Iowa getting confidence on offense that Illinois never had the previous week.
Yeah, I think it was a completely different game plan. You look at Iowa and the way that they've played offense, it felt more like just allow them to take the easy ones. Don't give up anything deep. I don't think that Indiana believed that Iowa was going to be able to sustain a 12-play drive 6 yards at a time, and they showed that they couldn't. I mean, they scored 13 points on their own. Typically, if you score only 13 points, you're not going to win the game. I don't think they probably anticipated getting as much heat. I mean, Iowa, give them a ton of credit on defense. They were heating up Mendoza. An offensive line that's been pretty good, felt a little flustered. You get Bray Lynch get beat on a 4-man rush on the first drive of the game on 3rd and 2. It felt like, and I think Cignetti even alluded to this, it felt like it just kind of shook us up a little bit, that now we had to keep more guys in the box. And when you have more guys in the box, it's maybe a little easier to run the ball, but it's harder to throw it when you only have a couple guys out in routes. Those guys have to win against more defenders. And we played the game on their terms because that's what Iowa does. I can't remember. I think it may have been on Twitter. Somebody likened it to Wisconsin basketball. They just muck it up. And usually they find a way to win those games. That's the place where top 10 teams go to die. I can't tell you how many times I heard that.
I was already envisioning before the game even started. I feel like I've seen countless game-winning field goals from Iowa, whether it be against Penn State, Ohio State. They've beaten basically every elite team at Kinnick Stadium one time or another. And there were times during this game where it felt like Indiana was about to get theirs.
It felt like that for 58 minutes and 30 seconds. We just never couldn't find rhythm. And now we're talking like, oh, it's so bad. We couldn't find rhythm. What are we going to do? How are we going to play against Oregon? We won the game. That's a game you shouldn't win, and they did it anyways. And if you don't feel really good sitting here as Curt, Cignetti, and staff watching the tape, God, another misplay, another misplay, another misplay. And then you still look down and we won the game, even though probably came with 50% of our best stuff, maybe, against an Iowa team that has the number one offensive line in the country by a wide margin.
Ooh, and I had a stat. Again, this is not from the stats I already have pulled up. This is something that I
PFF?
saw on social. I might have been PFF. I think Hoosier Review is the account that I saw tweet this earlier today at the time of recording. I'm going to try to find it. I believe I retweeted it. And if I didn't, then I know I at least liked it. So hopefully I can find this here in just a moment.
Well, while you're looking.
There we go.
Going into the game.
I've got it.
Okay, go ahead.
You want to share your thought? You can go and share your thought real quick. But
I mean, before the game, and actually after the game, they still are. 4 of their offensive linemen are the highest graded offensive linemen at their position in America. Their 5th guy is 2nd rated, but he's a projected top 10 pick. So that's a monster offensive line that you're dealing with. And Indiana on defense stood up to the challenge. They finished with less than 100 rushing yards. Quarterback played well. Didn't get a ton of pressure on him, but bend, don't break. They're not going to sustain these drives. You saw how many times they had guys open over the middle and we missed throws, or they missed throws, especially that. Feels like they ran that little tight end sit route at 6 yards right over the center over and over and over again, and they completed it 50% of the time, even though it felt like our defense expanded and it was wide open. So it just felt like a game. Good luck. If you can go drive down the field against us, do your worst, and they didn't. So I thought it was a really good game plan on defense. But what's your statistic?
So this Hoosier Review posted this, and they gave credit to someone named Jordan Jamie. And it says, how good was Indiana's defensive front against Iowa? Front 7, I should say. And here's the bullet points. Iowa's number 1 ranked offensive line graded at a 48. That was their worst grade since 2023.
And that's 48 out of 100 on the PFF scale.
That's wild.
It's insane.
Their worst grade. They also, Indiana had an 84.8 run defense grade. Of course, when you're thinking about going up against some of the better offensive lines, that's pretty good. You're going to have another great test against Oregon in a couple of weeks. Iowa had a net -3 yards before contact. And then last, Indiana had 8 tackles for loss or no gain.
That's incredible. Just a phenomenal performance from the defense. And we talk so much about Mendoza, Heisman campaign, completing 1,000,000% of his passes, scoring 63 points against Illinois. That doesn't happen every week. Sometimes the other side of the ball is going to have to win you a game when you're all out of sync and out of rhythm. And it feels like Iowa's just pressing. I mean, they applied serious pressure. They brought the house, it felt like, over and over again. Everybody's talking about the cover 0 on 3rd and 10 that Surratt scored on. And sure, it's a weird time for that call, but I bet they called cover 0 blitz 15 to 20 times during the game and stuffed us. It had been a defense that had a lot of success, a call that had a lot of success against us, and they just believed they could get to Mendoza before he could find somebody. 95% of the time they did it, it worked. Unfortunately for them, the time that it didn't, Surratt breaks a tackle and runs for a touchdown, but a really, really good game plan from Iowa, and they executed it at a really high level. They beat a lot of teams on Saturday.
And if Indiana's going to be a championship team, and this is, excuse me, this is weird to talk about because Indiana's not usually in these positions, you just find ways to win games whenever you're not dictating the pace. Like at the beginning of that game when Indiana gets the interception the first couple of plays, then they score almost immediately after. A lot of people assume it's just going to be a rout. And that's
Me
the
too.
natural instinct whenever that happens early on. And honestly feels like 90% of the time when there's a weird, funky score like that early on, it usually doesn't dictate the pace at all. But it does feel like people go in that direction.
I think I texted my dad 100-0 Natty Champs right after that happened. So
but
I fell victim too.
The fact that, and I kind of thought, I was like, maybe this will be a blowout. I wasn't really sure initially, but of course, Iowa settled in. That wasn't the case. But when you can find a way to win on the road, when you're being forced to play the other team's style for 90%, really the entire game, there was only a couple of plays where Indiana played the way that they really wanted to play. When you still find a way to win, even if it takes a couple of breaks, that's championship football. You think Ohio State didn't catch a couple of breaks at all last year during their championship run? People wrote them off last year when they lost to Michigan at home. Like this team, and I'm not saying Indiana is going to win a national championship. I think they have the ability to get there. But regardless, whoever wins the national championship, there are going to be moments this season, Indiana included, where you're going to question, like there's going to be some adversity is what I'm trying to say. There's going to be moments kind of like what we saw with Iowa where you wonder if they're going to get it done. There's going to be moments like that throughout the rest of the season. We're probably going to see, it's probably going to be a very similar game, maybe a little less mucky against Oregon on the road. It's going to be sloppy. Both teams have very tough defenses. And you saw Oregon, they were kind of in a slugfest against Penn State the other night. They eventually kind of got some things going, but for a while, that was a 3-3 defensive affair in University Park.
Yeah, that's year in, year out, one of the highest flying offenses. Their quarterback is fantastic. They've got speed all over the field, 5-star offensive linemen, fantastic on offense. Penn State's got a great defense. So does Iowa. Everybody's talking about the Rutgers game. When you watch the first 3 minutes of the Rutgers game, I think there were 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns on just broken plays. Iowa had a kickoff return. Rutgers had a long touchdown, just back and forth, nobody playing any defense. And then when it was time to tighten the screws, I don't think Rutgers had 5 yards of offense. Like that's a team that is not bad. They're not great. They're going to struggle because they can't score. But I would guess at the end of the year, their defensive statistics are going to be right up there in the top of the Big Ten just because they're so physical and really disciplined. Even when I was playing a billion years ago, that's the same way Iowa played. They play you in what's called 2-man coverage or bring just 1 or 2 guys, but it feels like they're just attached at the hip. It's all about being physical at the line of scrimmage to get you off your route. Now you're a little bit late, and especially in an offense like Indiana's, it's all about timing, that RPO. Like you got to get to the spot. If they get hands on and you're getting physical, especially the linebackers, because a lot of these RPOs happen right behind the linebackers. Linebackers are coached at Iowa to collision, especially your slots. Collision the slot, throws off everything. When your slot receivers aren't on time, now your quarterback's not going through his progressions, now you're late to the last receiver. Everything gets a little muckier, and when the game gets condensed, because, I think the first half lasted like 45 minutes. It was the fastest first half I can remember. When the possessions become so valuable and you're off rhythm, off kilter, getting pressed on a little bit, you start to get a little more you're pressing and you're anxious. Okay, we got to really squeeze the sand. And it just felt like Indiana never got on schedule with a lot of their things that they were trying to do. But we can always come back, John.
That's true.
1-0 in our last one. It was the most impressive game to me that I've seen.
Impressive in the sense that, and again, I'm not going to keep beating a dead horse and running in circles here, but we've only seen Indiana win a game where the pressure was on late one other time in the Cignetti era, I should say. Really, maybe ever, because how many times did they win close games like this before the Cignetti era? Not very often. These were games where during any era prior to this, you're like, oh, here comes chaos team. They're going to be in this till the end, and then everything's just going to blow open in the fourth quarter. That's how things used to go for Indiana football.
I'm aware.
That's no longer the case. But I guess looking ahead to Oregon, we kind of talked a little bit about it in the last couple of minutes, and I don't know how much of Oregon you've watched other than maybe the Penn State game. I've not watched a ton myself, but do you think it'll be similar to the Iowa game? I don't really know exactly what to expect. I think there's a lot greater risk for the big play when it comes to Oregon as opposed to Iowa. I'm talking defensively for Indiana.
Oh yeah. They can kill you much quicker. They're not a team that you can just allow to dink and dunk, because they will, and they're effective, and they can just go up and down the field, and they also have enough speed to smoke you over the top when you get a little antsy. I don't think Iowa had the speed at receiver to double move you or something when you start getting a little too far on your toes. I mean, this is obvious. This is a completely different level of test in their building. Probably going to be a similar, if not better, environment.
And they've already, I don't know if you saw, you probably have seen it, but they've announced I can't let me use the basketball term. Kickoff 3:30 CBS, which is noon, of course, Oregon time. So it'll be basically a noon kickoff.
Yeah, I would imagine a raucous environment coming off a win. They get a bye too, so their fans will be itching. They're already talking about us, thinking about us. I think the bye comes at a really good time for Indiana. I assume it does for Oregon as well, but
two emotional wins for both teams this past weekend.
Right. You just get a little time to reset. I think it's kind of nice. I would almost rather have Iowa happen after Illinois. I feel better about Oregon because Iowa was after Illinois than if it was inverse. Because you're probably going to have
you eliminate the cockiness.
Exactly.
Now you're more on your toes. You probably feel like you're more like you need to prepare a little harder going into this game.
I mean, if people are in my Twitter talking crazy about how we want to fire Cignetti because we didn't execute, which is that's real. That's real.
You're telling me somebody told you fire Cignetti this past weekend?
Not fire him, but we're losing faith in him.
Okay.
That's a quote. You read it. So if you're listening to this,
I did see. Yeah, I didn't know you were referring to the same tweet, but I did see that.
Yeah. If you're listening to this person that tweeted at me that you're losing faith in Cignetti, you're an idiot. And I want you to know that. I digress. But you probably have it's not the same vibe going to class for the next 2 weeks as it was after Illinois, if you're a player. Not the same vibe on campus where, oh my God, we're the best team ever. Now, do I still think that? Maybe. I think we might be the best team in America. I'm not as confident as I was a week ago. So you took some knocks, looked kind of ugly, but you won ugly. And I would imagine that this week in practice, Cignetti is not going to struggle to find things to correct. And I think you can have a really, really good week of practice after a game like this, even though it is a bye week and you're trying to rest some of your dudes.
By the way, people were ready to fire. You're talking about firing, and I know it was nonsensical, but people were ready to fire Ryan Day after they lost to Michigan again last year, and then he went on to win the Natty.
Yeah, I think we're all idiots, John.
We're all just idiots.
I think all the fans, and that's why it's so great. Because how fun is it to live and die with some college kids and that wear your school across their jersey? It's just the best. But I'm not saying anything crazy when I say I don't think this Oregon team is as tough as Ohio State was last year going there, but it's a similar spot, obviously. And it's a team that you aren't near as familiar with. Played Ohio State every year for the last 20 years. That's a team that we're intimately familiar with, an environment we're intimately familiar with. You kind of know what you're going to get with Ohio State. You know it's going to be tough, and you know they're going to have guys everywhere. But we haven't played Oregon in 30 years. We haven't been to that stadium. I guess it's only been 20 years. So it was 2007, I think.
I didn't know we ever played Oregon.
We went to Oregon, and I think we beat them in 2007.
Really? Oregon was a trash program for a while, though.
No, same Oregon.
Really?
No, absolutely not. But I'm gonna tell myself that we've already done this once before. I think we did beat them, but they were not the Oregon that they are now. I just think they got
Oregon.
Dumb that
joke.
Was terrible. I like it though. You got to take your shots. You got to take them. Dan Lanning, I think, is the class of college football in terms of a head coach and a guy.
He's like your Friday Night Lights type head football coach.
He's the guy you want to play for. if you're a high school kid. That guy, he's cool. He built a program that's cool. Well, the program was already cool, and he made them mean. That was always the knock on Oregon, that they could only win the high-flying games, and then they go to Penn State and win the slugfest, similar to Indiana, right? You got to win slugfest. They prove they can do that. They probably have, if you look at pure talent, more talent than us. I don't think that's crazy to say. Indiana's got to out-execute. You got to out 50-50 ball somebody. You got to go make competitive plays. This is going to be the most competitive game. But I think there's a little bit different belief in the locker room this year maybe than there was last year at Indiana, where you still have some guys that expect to win, but like, kind of, holy crap, we're really good.
Well, there's a lot of things you have going your way, or at least being talked about, that weren't being talked about last year. Last year, you were the cool story, the new kid on the block. Now you're getting Heisman talk with Fernando Mendoza. You're getting all these compliments about how awesome your defense is. And you got weapons all over the field. Elijah Surratt might be the best wide receiver in the Big Ten, maybe behind Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah.
And Omar Cooper Jr. is a nice compliment. I mean, Indiana has a 1-2 punch that I don't know if any other team has.
Ohio State probably does. I don't know who their
maybe Oregon does too. I don't really know. I couldn't. If I'm being honest, I couldn't tell you who their receivers are.
Jeremiah Smith's tough, but I mean, it's at least top 3 in the Big Ten when you talk about dynamic playmakers. I think we need one more playmaker at wide receiver to kind of come alive. EJ Williams has been good.
He had a good catch against Iowa too.
Yes, he did. That's that throw I referenced at the beginning of the show from our own goal line, the like 35-yard cover 2 hole shot, high NFL caliber throw to EJ Williams. He's been great. I think you got to get him more involved somehow, and I know that's just progressions and what it is, but showed a lot of flashes. I just think there needs to be that kind of third spear when things are getting a little mucked up for Surratt and Cooper. You got to have somebody that you can.
I think he can be the tight end too. We've seen Nowakowski make a couple touchdown runs, and Indiana's never really been a school. I mean, it doesn't really matter about, I guess for Iowa it does. They've always been kind of the muck it up team, but they don't have a history of really good tight ends. There's been some good ones in the last maybe 5-10 years, but there's only a handful that have ever really been massive playmakers for Indiana, I feel like.
Yeah, I think Zach Horton and Ted Bolzer are probably the two. Peyton Hendershot was a good player.
Yep.
But
those are all in the last 10 years.
Yeah, right. I can't think of any. I'm sure there's other guys that we can't remember, but having a dynamic playmaker, and I think Nowakowski's close to that. I don't think he's super explosive, and I don't know how big he is. Do you know how big he is?
I don't have his height waiting for me. He
Whatever
doesn't on his touchdown run. When I think of him, he doesn't look like your traditional big bulky tight end.
He looks 6'2" to me, which is plenty. 6'2", 6'3", but he's not like the 6'5" Tyler Warren body that is just a freak. And there's been one Tyler Warren, so not maybe a fair comparison, but they're Indiana hasn't had to execute at the level that they're going to need to win on Saturday since Cignetti's been there, I think. Do I think they can do it? Absolutely. That's it. I think they can win.
For some reason, I thought that was a dramatic pause before you're going to go into something else. And I mean, I guess we'll wrap it up here in a second, but going back to conversations we've had really leading up to this, and I know Indiana is going into a bye week, so there's a couple of weeks before this actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
But this is Indiana's next, mountain, right? They faced Ohio State last year, and they proved that it was a little too big to climb for them at the moment. But now you've come to something else. It's not quite on the same level as what you were facing with Ohio State in terms of what feels, on the possibility scale of getting it done. But it's still in that same realm of you're going against what is one of the current elite programs on the road, just won a Big Ten championship in their first year in the league last season. And a win here, it does a lot of things, but in the immediate, it probably puts you as the number 2 team in the country in the AP. That's what it'll do the following week because Oregon's currently number 2. You go and beat number 2 on the road. I think you should, where Indiana's at right now, I think you should replace them at that point. That's what you saw with Ole Miss and LSU, and that was a home game for Ole Miss. So I think that's one thing.
Same thing with, I guess Penn State wasn't 2, but I mean Oregon vaulted.
They might have been 2. They were 2 or either way.
Yeah, whatever it was, they vaulted. Yeah, I mean You get that, but I think more than anything, this is where Indiana wants to be. What Oregon
Yes.
has and what Oregon is and how Oregon recruits, that's where we want to be. But to play with the big dogs and to beat the big dogs, you got to knock them out. Like, this isn't going to be they're going to give it to you, and I just hope we win. They're that good for a reason. They're that good every year for a reason. They bring in the type of players that they have for a reason, because they do things the right way and they do it at a really high level. So, it's I don't know if show me game is right, because I do.
Well, it's a show me in the sense that, like, to continue, I guess, what I was saying.
Yeah, sorry.
You're in the driver's seat for the Big Ten championship at that point. You beat Oregon. You've got one more monster on your schedule with Penn State, and then that could create some sort of tie if you end up losing that. We all know how last year panned out for Indiana and that sort of thing. But you're in the driver's seat. Of course, anything can happen. You never know if Indiana, might lose a freak game that they shouldn't. I'm not going to predict that by any means.
Happens to everybody. Happens all the time.
But you defeat Oregon on the road. I mean, you pretty much all but secured a college football playoff spot. I also believe, and this is a loser's mentality to say, but it's still probably fact, I think Indiana can lose close, both at Oregon and Penn State. And if they run the table the rest of the way, I think they can still find themselves in the playoff. But you beat one of those two and go 11-1. I mean, there's no reason they won't be in the playoff once again. Maybe in the Big Ten championship, maybe even hosting a college football playoff game instead of visiting a Notre Dame or something like that. So there's a lot on the table. And then for future seasons to come, this shows that as long as Cignetti's at the helm for Indiana, that I think you could confidently say that this will be the norm if he decides he's going to continue to stay in Bloomington for however much longer he's going to be a head coach.
It feels like it. Saturday did a lot to prove that to me. The best programs win in a lot of ways. They won in the ugliest possible way at the last possible second when all hope was lost. I'd be curious what the win probability chart looked like after the Mendoza pick, but couldn't have looked very good for Indiana.
Hey, I had a 1% chance in winning my fantasy game last week, and Mark Andrews completely went off and helped me win. So anything can happen.
Anything's possible, baby. Anything is possible. On the Cignetti staying, I had an interesting thought.
Dustin and I talked about this earlier, too, so this will be an interesting way to wrap things up.
I don't want to talk about the money, the resources, none of that. Yada, yada, yada. The biggest indicator to me as I think about it that tells me he's going to stay. And I don't know anything. Who knows? He could leave tomorrow. But the level of recruit that Indiana has had on campus has just slowly and consistently gone up. You don't think that's the first thing people are asking?
What do you mean?
Are you going to be here?
Oh, I always think about that from a recruit's standpoint. Like, whenever you ask that question, what's your response? Whether you're Cignetti or somebody else who's having success that might get poached, what do you say in that situation? Here's what I bet you're saying, especially if you're a big time guy, because Cignetti, if he leaves, it's going to be a big time job, of course. If you're said recruit and you're asking Cignetti that question, you're saying one of two things. You're either saying I'm not going anywhere, or you're coming with me wherever I go. You're saying one of those two things. And at that point, because gotta think, today's day and age, college recruits, they're not really committing to the school as much as they are the coach. And maybe that's always been the case for the most part.
Yeah,
that's always been a little bit different for certain, like maybe in-state guys if you have a love affair with the program. But I think a lot of those conversations are, like if I'm Cignetti, it's like, well, I plan on being here, but if something crazy happens and I'm not, he's probably not mentioning certain schools, and he's elsewhere, he's like, you're my first call, come on with me. That's sort of, I don't know how good my Cignetti impression is. It's probably pretty bad.
I thought it was pretty good. And I knew what you were doing, so that counts for something. I guess that is different. The transfer portal kind of opens that up, and I hadn't considered that. But, I mean, you think about a guy like Jalen Brewster, the 5-star defensive lineman. He's not coming to Indiana probably. But the fact that he made the visit tells me that it was at least worth the time to come. They can pay you enough.
I mean, he saw the defensive line do about as good as they could have.
Dominate. They can pay you enough. This school can afford to have me. And it's worth a conversation and worth a visit to go see. I mean, he could have gone anywhere that Saturday. It's people in Dallas still, I mean, people around the country still are doing their best to say Indiana's not that. This is lucky. Everything is lucky. If you're a guy like Jalen Brewster, you're not chomping at the bit to come to Bloomington if you don't believe in what's happening and believe that the coach is going. Like, that's not worth your time. It's not worth your time to go to that school if the conversation, at least in my head, is the conversation is if I go anywhere, you're coming with me. Why wouldn't I just go the place I want to go? And then if you go somewhere else, I'll transfer there. So I don't know. I just have a hard time. I mean, obviously now it's all over the place, and it will be all over the place until people shut the heck up about Indiana being Indiana and realize that this is no longer the teams that I played on or the teams from whenever. This is a different
This
Indiana.
is different than the Bill. Everybody used to glorify the Bill Mallory era. And I know that we're far from being the amount of time that era was, but this is above that level.
This is unlike anything Indiana's ever experienced, probably combined. Put it all together, 1967 Big Ten champs went to the Rose Bowl. This is different. This is better. It just is. And I don't know. I'm already tired of hearing of it, John. I think that's my problem.
Tired of what?
Tired of listening to all these idiots. So I saw somebody. I need to get off Twitter because some Sports Illustrated guy he's like a UCLA Sports Illustrated guy. UCLA fired their coach in a pretty good position, I would think. Pretty ideal job. That's a job you want. He said that UCLA, with all the resources they have, way more than Indiana, they have to go and get Cignetti. That's our only hope, and that's what I think will happen. And I'm really excited for Cignetti to. And this is it's not like a satirical. This is Sports Illustrated. This isn't some guy writing a blog. I'm tired of it. He's going
the outside perspective, and of course, everyone knows what Indiana was, but now there's, like you said, there's money involved now. There's investment in
big
facilities.
Money.
There's things that haven't even begun to happen, like things that you and I talked about during the offseason. Cignetti, because of his presence, like the value of the Indiana program is already something that it never was. Even if Cignetti were to leave, the value of the Indiana program is greater than that of probably some of the other probably all of the other traditionally bottom feeder programs in Power 4. And definitely, I would say from the ACC and the Big 12 specifically. I know some people get upset, not necessarily from this show, whenever I kind of put the ACC and the Big 12 on a lower pedestal than the Big 10 and the SEC. That's just the way things are. The Big 10 and the SEC run college sports in pretty much every aspect. They're the largest two conferences. They have the most money. They have the most lucrative television deals. That's not changing anytime soon. They call all the shots. There's a reason that there's more than likely going to be auto bids for both of those leagues in the near future. And so Indiana, just by even being in the Big 10, like that's, and I know we're talking, UCLA, Indiana, whatever, but also the UCLA aspect of it. UCLA is like number 4 or 5 in Los Angeles. Like nobody cares about UCLA sports the way they did back in the 70s and 80s. People are going to watch the Lakers, the Clippers, the freaking LA Kings, probably. That's the hockey team, I'm pretty sure. The Chargers, the Rams, name any professional. They're probably number 6 or 7.
USC.
Actually. Yeah. UCLA is not moving the needle in anything. And yeah, they had Chip Kelly at one point, but that was before there's a reason Chip Kelly left being a head coach to be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. It's because UCLA is a crap job compared to what it used to be.
I agree. And UCLA is a bad example. That's just what I saw on Twitter.
But either way,
it makes you mad, though.
Responding.
It makes you mad.
It got me fired up.
It's ridiculous. I'm curious and maybe we talk about this after the show because I don't want to spoil. Is Dustin on this show?
Dustin, yeah, he's again kind of like with Jeffrey the Greek. He's coming on right after you.
Okay, well then we won't spoil it. I am going to be curious.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about, I guess, again, as we do like to get meta on occasion for some reason. But yeah, I'll share what Dustin and I talked about after we hang this thing up here in just a second.
I like it.
And you guys will find out here in just a few minutes.
Ooh.
I'm sure some people are listening to this cornball of a show and like, what the hell am I doing? Click.
Yeah. Especially
ending it right there.
especially if you aren't watching it and didn't get to see your
Oh, yeah,
finger
yeah, yeah,
point
of
just now,
course.
you needed the finger point. Go to YouTube, watch it. That was a aggressive finger point that he just did. But I got nothing else, John. I think this is a great bye week. My brain needs it. I was
I need
extremely
it.
stressed. I wear a Whoop. Have you ever heard of Whoop?
No.
Okay, so Whoop is like a fitness tracker. I don't know why I wear it. I am not keeping
It's like
track
a
of
heart
anything.
monitor for
Similar,
30-year-olds.
similar, but it was tracking my like stress levels and heartbeat. My
Oh,
heartbeat
man.
was like 50% higher than normal, and my strain and stress. I was just sitting on the couch watching the game, and my strain, it's a 0 to 21. If you just sit all day, it's usually like a 5. I sat all day, and I had a 12 strain.
Got your heart rate up a little bit.
Man, I was straining. I'm happy we don't have to worry about that this weekend. Take a little break, Hoosier fans. Go outside because we got to be
Touch
locked in.
grass, as they say.
We got to be locked in on Saturday. 2 Saturdays
Mitchell,
from now.
as always, fun conversation. I get compliments about these interviews all the time, so I'm glad that you do these with me.
Oh, it's the best. I look forward to this every week, especially when we win. So much easier.
That's right. So much more fun. All right, we'll talk again next week. All right, big thanks to Mitchell Paige, as always. We love having him on. I feel like I say it. I'm like a broken record each and every week with Mitchell. It's always a pleasure to have him on, and we'll have him on for as often as he wants to come on, of course. But now we're going to go and get into our conversation with Dustin Schutte, continue to talk Big Ten football, but more of a broader look at things, not just IU. Going to look at some Purdue stuff as well. And of course, before we get into that segment, I'm going to tell you about Rhoback Activewear. There's only one way to describe Rhoback: best fit and best feel. For those who aren't familiar, they are completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Rhoback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, with novel polo designs and clean hoodie and quarter zips for Indiana and some of your other favorite schools if you happen to not be an Indiana fan. It's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else on the market is pairing this level of custom designs with this quality of activewear. Rhoback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They're both super comfortable, have an elastic waistband and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Rhoback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and are becoming the go-to brand for college athletes across the country. And as always, you can use the code IND20 on Rhoback.com for 20% off all new customers, spelled RHOBACK.com for 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more. Again, that code is IND20. All right, joining me now from Purdue on SI, it is good friend Dustin Schutte. Welcome back to In Touch with Indiana Sports.
Thank you, John. It has been too long since I have been able to talk to you, so I'm excited about this.
It's been way too long. I don't remember the last time you've been on the show. I do feel like you might have come on and talked some Pacers with me during the summertime. I think that might have been the last time we chatted.
I think you're correct. I think when they were in their finals run, we had a chat, and that was a lot of fun. So, yes, you are correct.
We're not going to get into Pacers stuff today, but just looking back on that right now, still can't believe that they were just so close. And who knows what would have happened had Tyrese Halliburton not gotten injured at the beginning of that game, but we'll have to leave that in the rearview mirror. For now, we're going to talk Big Ten football, Indiana, Purdue. You cover the Boilermakers. I do want to first start off by asking you, what's it been like, the coaching change with Barry Odom? How have things shifted from Ryan Walters to Barry Odom in just a few games in his short tenure so far?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is it looks like there's a purpose behind what they're doing. And that may sound overly simplistic, but there were times under Ryan Walters when it was just like you'd watch the game and be like, well, what are they trying to accomplish here? And there would be no improvement. And after a certain point in the game, it was just, I don't want to say they gave up, but there wasn't much fight left in that team. Through 4 games, and the last 2 have been a little bit on the ugly side, especially that last game against Notre Dame. But I think it's fair to say that at no point has Purdue quit through the first 4 games. And I think in particular, the last 2, like they were down, 30-10, I think it was, to USC. They go down immediately after giving up a pick 6, score a touchdown, and they're right back in the game. They ended up throwing another interception late, which ended up costing them. And then last week against Notre Dame, for the first half, they went toe-to-toe with one of the best offenses in the country. Now, their defense couldn't stop anybody, and the second half got out of hand. But I get the feeling, John, that even if this team isn't a great team and doesn't have that type of Curt Cignetti turnaround, that there's a lot of things to build on and a lot of things that you look at as positives, and not rolling over is one of those. This team doesn't really, kind of the same way Indiana doesn't look at the scoreboard when they're winning, Purdue doesn't look at the scoreboard when they've been in those tough situations. It's just a legitimate old coaching cliche, next play at a time, one drive at a time. And they've kind of taken that mentality. And even those things have not been great the last 2 weeks, I think they've been extremely fun to watch. And moving forward now, I think this is the most important month on their schedule. They will play Illinois on Saturday. Then they will play Minnesota and Northwestern. And then they'll close out the month with a game against Rutgers. And John, I think legitimately you look at that schedule and you could say they could win anywhere from 1 to 4 games. I don't think
that is a stretch of all winnable games, I feel like. And some would probably say Illinois shouldn't be a winnable game. But I think after what you saw Indiana was able to do to Illinois is the type of team where if you rattled their mentality early and you take advantage of it, anybody can beat them. And that's not to say that Illinois is a bad team. They're more so just a fragile team, and this weekend will be a good opportunity if Purdue wants to show that they really have taken a step forward from last. I mean, they have taken a step forward, but maybe a bigger step than people imagine. Maybe that starts this weekend against the Illini.
Yeah, I think when you look at Illinois, I still think they're a really good football team. I think the game against Indiana, I think Indiana was first and foremost the better team, but then I think you look at the injuries and that probably played into the final score. I think if Illinois was at full strength, Indiana still probably wins that game by 2 or 3 touchdowns, but I think it's not 63-10. Illinois will be closer to full strength than they were coming into this game against Purdue, but I think Purdue's going to be able to offensively hang with them. It's going to be a matter of defensively, can they get the stops where they need them? And I think that this is a big test. Purdue's coming off of a bye week, they had 2 weeks basically to prepare for this matchup. And Illinois right now has not had a bye week. So maybe Purdue comes out a little bit fresh. It's a home game. Illinois is coming off of an emotional win. They've played 6 straight weeks. Anything can happen in this one. I think that 10.5 point spread in favor of Illinois is probably fair. But I would not be surprised if Purdue has pulled off an upset. Now, I mentioned this a few weeks ago with USC and didn't turn out that way. I did not think they would beat Notre Dame, but we'll see. I think the only game on that schedule I feel good about as marking up as an automatic win is Northwestern. I think Purdue is a better football team than Northwestern. But again, those other 3 games, I think if you win 3, then all of a sudden you've got 5 wins and you're knocking on the door of bowl eligibility. And if you're able to go 4-0, which is a really tall ask, but I don't think it's impossible, then you're looking at 6-2. And what a way to get to bowl eligibility before the calendar turns to November, a year after you go 1-11. So we could be talking about a 6-2 Purdue team at the end of the month, or a 3-5 Purdue team at the end of the month. So it could go a lot of different ways here these next couple of weeks.
And it could make for a very interesting Old Oaken bucket game at the end of the season. I mean, we don't know what Indiana's record's going to be like. We don't really know where either one of these 2 teams are going to be at the end of the season. We can talk about it one way or another, but I think all fans, I don't know. It was pretty satisfying to see Indiana do what they did last year, at least once. But I think overall, fans want to see a more competitive bucket game in most seasons, I would imagine. You want your team to win, but also the game's it's not always going to be fun winning 66-0. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think it's definitely better for TV ratings when the games are more or closer, of course.
Yeah, no, I think there's some truth to that. I think a lot of fans wouldn't admit that, but I think for the most part, fans want to see their team beat good teams, right? Like I think that there was some truth to last year, Indiana not playing a tough schedule. And so they beat everybody, except for late in the year, they beat everybody by 3 or 4 touchdowns. That was certainly fun for Indiana because they haven't ever done that before. But I think that there is if we can beat a good Purdue team, I mean, just like a few weeks ago, you beat a good Illinois team and you pound them, then I think you feel really good about it. But yes. I don't think maybe I'm wrong. I wouldn't think most Indiana fans would want to see a 1-11 Purdue team. They probably want a few wins especially nowadays where you have to boost your college football playoff resume.
Yes.
You'd want to see them at 5 or 6 or 7 wins somewhere along that road. So we'll see. But to your point, as just a college football fan, there have been only 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years where both teams they haven't even been great. They've been basically bowl eligible. There was one year where obviously Indiana had a really solid season because they didn't play in 2020, but 2019, that IU team had 8 wins. And then in 2022, Purdue was fighting for a Big Ten West championship and ultimately got it in Bloomington. But I think you want to see more of those competitive because it's just more fun. It adds more juice to the end of the season. It adds more excitement. There's something to play for.
It's also very strange. Like, why can't, and again, not that I want Purdue to be like a world beater, but why is it that there's never a year where both teams are on the up and coming? It seems like the pendulum has to swing in favor of one program, then the other one goes into the toilet for a few seasons. Yeah. I don't know if there's a secret formula to figuring that out, but that seems like that's how things have gone the last several decades. Yeah,
the state of Indiana can't figure out how to field 2 really competent football teams at the same time, apparently. And we're not counting Notre Dame with, just southbound Chicago. But I don't. It'd be interesting. I do think though, and I don't know if I don't want to put a ceiling on Barry Odom, but I just want to say like whether or not Barry Odom gets Purdue to where Indiana is, I think there's that possibility. But even if he doesn't, I think Purdue's in really good shape. So I think you're going to see some of those games where Indiana and Purdue are, 8, 9, 10 win teams fairly regularly. And we're going to have some good battles at the end of the season. It may not necessarily happen this year, but I think at some point down the road, I think obviously we've seen Curt Cignetti's not going anywhere in terms of the success that Indiana's had. And again, I think Barry Odom's done a really good job in year 1. And so that gives some hope to the future that we're going to have some actually really good Purdue versus Indiana games here in the near future.
Let's look a little more at the big picture of the Big Ten so far. Who's kind of been, and I'm not asking you to compliment Indiana. You can if you want, but you go whichever direction you want with this. Who has been the most impressive with you between really the 4 unbeatens? And one of them is kind of surprising. You got Maryland, you got Oregon, you got Ohio State, and of course the Hoosiers.
Yeah, I would probably say to this point, I would put Oregon ahead of Indiana. And the only reason is because I think to go on the road, win in a whiteout game, Penn State had what's crazy, and I don't know if it's maybe a more impressive win for Oregon or a bigger disappointment for Penn State. I'm still kind of
James Franklin cannot get that monkey off his back.
He cannot.
Sitting in top 10 loss limbo for forever.
Yes, and he can't seem to get out of that purgatory. So, but to go on the road for Oregon to do that, to win in a whiteout environment, Penn State had basically the entire offseason. Like they played 3 cupcakes. Everybody criticizes Indiana's schedule, but Penn State's schedule was atrocious in the non-conference. Then they get a bye week. They haven't left the state of Pennsylvania. So I don't understand. So for point being, for Oregon to go get that win on the road, and then they've blown everybody else out. I think Indiana's probably second on that list, to get a win over a top 10 Illinois team at home, and then to go on the road in Kinnick Stadium. That was really a gutsy win, that game, in Iowa City. I think they found out just how difficult it can be to win on the road against a good opponent in the Big Ten.
Well, real quick, not to step on your toes, but that interception from Fernando Mendoza, especially when you factor in the return that the defensive back made for Iowa, it felt like a death sentence. It felt like they were going to run out the clock, have a few seconds left, and kick a field goal. Of course, they didn't do either one of those things. They were able to get him stopped before the 2-minute warning, and then Drew Stevens, I believe is his name, goes wide left and gives Indiana a hope that I don't think that most fans thought they were going to have. And of course they capitalized. I think that was one of the moments so far for me that showed me that things really are different under Curt Cignetti, especially because you mentioned the schedule last year. You've already played a top 10 team in Illinois, at least at the time they were top 10. And then what's definitely been your toughest road test outside of Ohio State and Notre Dame so far in his tenure. And he showed that he can hang in that game. And win that game, of course.
Yeah, you know what's funny? I'm going to add a quick anecdote here is, and maybe you will be the only one who understands this reference, but Abby sent me a text because I was in Indiana for a free concert over the weekend, and she sent me a text and said, Iowa losing basically on special teams is a sign that we are in the darkest timeline. Because, you know, because Iowa is notorious for, you know, defensive
Little
pressure,
community
making
reference
plays.
right there, by the way.
That's right. And their special teams play is usually flawless. So for them to lose basically because of that, you know,
I was already envisioning, Dustin, the game winning. This is before the game even happened. Game winning field goal, field storming. Not the bottom falls out for Indiana, but of course all the national hype goes away. And thankfully, at least for my sake, that was not the case. But go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think people maybe don't value how much this is going to do for Indiana's confidence moving forward, because their two biggest games now the rest of the way are both on the road.
Absolutely.
And they play at Penn State. They'll play at Oregon first, and then they'll play later in the season at Penn State. Sorry. To me, if you lose that game to Iowa, it's not a death sentence in terms of their college football play, but you have to win one of those games. And then number two, if those games are close, then those old thoughts, it's more mind than physical, right? It's more mental than physical, where it sneaks in and say, hey, this is how we lost to Iowa a few weeks ago. We got to play, you know, maybe you tighten up, you tense up. The fact that they were able to sneak out of there with a win, I think gives them some confidence. And if those games are close at Oregon and at Penn State, now they've said, we've been in this situation before. We can come from behind. We still have all the confidence in the world. We don't maybe feel the same pressure we would have as if we lost a game. And so I think that more than just winning on the road, I think that that's a benefit to this team moving forward. And I mean, everybody's going to be tuned in a couple of weeks, right, for that Indiana-Oregon game. I'm going to make, I don't want to say, I don't know if this is a prediction or not, but just kind of looking into the future, if I had to pick, I think Indiana probably loses to Oregon on the road, but I think they're good enough to beat Penn State at home.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I'll say a couple things. First of all, I think Indiana will have a fighting chance if you lose both of those games close. Finish the season 10-2. There's a chance they could still sneak into the college football playoff. Of course, you're worrying about what other teams are doing to some extent with that sort of a record. But you steal one of those and you don't drop any of the other games that you're supposed to win. I mean, you pretty much have an automatic ticket this year. You're not sweating out an 11-1 record because it's a lot stronger of an 11-1 record as opposed to last year.
No, I completely agree with you on that. And I mean, they're going to have the win over Iowa. They're going to have the win over Illinois, which are two quality wins. Michigan State, there's a lot we don't know, but you look right now, Michigan State is 3-1. Maryland, as you mentioned, is 4-0. They played a weak schedule too, but they also went on the road and beat Wisconsin, and Wisconsin is garbage. So, you know, we'll see. But then, and then as we talked about, John, at the end of the year, whether or not Purdue's fighting for bowl eligibility or has bowl eligibility, it's a much better Purdue team than they played last season. I think that's going to be at least a 5-win Purdue team. So I think that your strength of record, the only thing really tying you down there is the non-conference in UCLA. Yeah, UCLA being so bad.
Could be worse than both Kennesaw State and Old Dominion, who's ended up being pretty good so far with their record.
I think they are worse than Old Dominion. Kennesaw State would still be up in the air. So, yeah, I think
that's your alma mater, is it not, Kennesaw State?
No, I just live there. I did not go there.
You live down there. Yeah. Gotcha. I know you've been all over the place throughout your lifetime. But, yeah, what about the Buckeyes? Of course, Indiana doesn't play the Buckeyes this year. It does kind of feel like, even though they haven't really had that cutthroat moment. Of course, they did beat Texas at the beginning of the season. It's kind of turned out that they were a little bit overhyped. Doesn't mean that Texas is bad. Just means maybe they weren't the juggernaut that people were expecting them to be. But since that opening week game, it feels like Ohio State's kind of just been – they've been kind of on cruise control. They haven't really done anything super amazing, but they've taken care of business the way that they're supposed to. They're sitting atop the rankings at number 1 very happily as the reigning national champions, hoping to do the same thing again this year. What impresses you about what they're able to do and maybe kind of what they're going to continue to do this season?
Well, I think they're going to continue to get better offensively. I think that's a real positive for them. I think obviously Julian Sayin is still really green and still kind of figuring some things out. I think here's the thing. I think you look at that final score against Washington, 24-6, and you're probably not overwhelmed by it. I actually think Washington's a really good football team this year. I'm not saying they're college football playoff worthy, but I think they're a solid, sound team. And that's a team that had they won 16 straight home games or something? Maybe it was even more than that.
I don't remember the number, but there was a decent streak attached to their stadium.
Yeah, so I think that was a really high quality win, but I think that also when you look at the rest of this schedule for Ohio State, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, I think it's fair to say that going into November, you probably look at Ohio State and say, okay, this is where we're going to find out about the Buckeyes because they'll play Penn State, and then at the end of the year they'll play Michigan. So they don't have, and in that time they play Purdue, they play UCLA, they play Rutgers. There's some scrappy teams in there, but I think until you get to that Penn State game and then at the end of the season, what they can do against Michigan, I think it's fair to leave a question mark out there. I will say that I think their defense, they've given up all of 21 or 22 points in 4 games. That's really difficult to do. I don't care who you're playing, but they did that against Texas and Arch Manning. They did that against Washington, who is a much improved offense. I think their defense is the highlight, and their offense is only going to get better. So, this is why I would put Ohio State third on that list, because as much as they beat Texas, I do think Illinois and the wins over Illinois and Iowa and Oregon's win over Penn State are more impressive than the win at home for Ohio State, especially in week 1.
That is interesting to think about because many people, I feel like most national people would say that Texas is the best win overall, especially, because of the Arch Manning thing and all, the preseason hype. Plus they were number 1, just like Illinois was number 9. Again, things change throughout the season as things go on. But here's the last thing I want to get into before we wrap things up. And this is more of kind of a novelty discussion that I just wanted to end things on, based on some things I've seen on social media. From not necessarily from you, but maybe I'll just go ahead and get into it. Let's say the Florida job opens up, whether it be in the middle of the season or the end of the year. A lot of people, and includes me, more so last year as opposed to this year, for one reason or another. But people have thrown out the idea that whether if an elite job or what people would consider an elite level job opens up, Florida being that example, that Cignetti may get this God tier offer based on what he's done in a year and a half at Indiana, and rightfully so. Whatever program is going to eventually end up wanting him is going to throw maybe one of the most ridiculous deals that we've ever seen. Whether he accepts that or not, that's what I want to ask you about, because it's a very there's a lot of layers to it. I'm not asking you to unpack everything. You can just kind of give me your short answer if you want to, but I do want to hear your thoughts, especially as somebody who's not an Indiana fan. You're more of an objective outsider from this. What do you kind of think could potentially happen if, whether it's Florida or somebody else offering some sort of God tier offer to him this upcoming offseason?
Well, I do believe the Florida job will be open. I think they have a tough schedule. They're probably not going to get to bowl eligibility, and I think that job's going to be open, and I think they'll probably make a strong push because he fits. What's interesting, John, you know this. I lived in Gainesville for a year.
That's right.
And so I've been to some games. I know their fan base a little bit. I'm not going to say I have an intricate knowledge of their fan base, but what they love is high-powered offense. They love winners, and they show up every single week. And so that's why it's critically important for Indiana to continue to fill the stands at Memorial Stadium. They were a little bit behind in terms of their facilities, but that's now a benefit to them.
You're referring to the stadium kind of being a little old, but it's kind of more so vintage at this point. You're referring to Florida?
No, they're like practice facilities. They're practice facilities,
gotcha.
And their training rooms and that stuff has been updated and upgraded. And so they're in a really good spot there right now. The Swamp is probably one of the top 5 venues in college football. Yeah. So there would be a lot of attractive reasons to go. And then obviously you can recruit all over the state and be home by dinner every night, right? Because there's just so much talent in Florida. So here would be my thing, John. I think if Indiana were to finish 10-2 or 9-3 and be on the outside of the college football playoff, or maybe they get in and something happens like last year, maybe they play, just to throw it out there, they play Oregon again and maybe they lose by 2 or 3 touchdowns. I'm just throwing out a scenario. I don't know that would happen. I think he would seriously consider that offer because at his age, I think he really wants to win a national championship. And you might say, I might be able to attract better talent at Florida. I might be able to get better fan support at Florida. And this is not a knock to Indy. This is just straight up how it's, these are kind of the
truth.
facts.
I mean, Indiana, they're flocking to Memorial Stadium right now because they're winning. That's why the stadium's filling up.
But if they go 10-2, 11-1, get into the playoff and maybe win a game or two, and you're very competitive, I think he stays. I think he says, you know what, I think I can do this at Indiana. So to your point, I think there are a lot of factors. If he gets to the playoff and they win a game or maybe 2 games or whatever, and there are signs that we can win here, we can do this here. And I think he believes it now, but I think if you go 9-3, 10-2, and you're either left out or you're not, you're not competitive in that game.
Much back when maybe you weren't expecting to take that step back.
Right. And maybe you have something similar to the Notre Dame result last year. I'm not saying he would go, but I think at that point
you're worried that you've hit your ceiling at a place like Indiana.
Man, that was so well put. Yes, because I feel like, then you're considering, hey, if I want to win a national championship, I'm in my 60s. Maybe I take a shot here at the SEC, and especially with their 9 conference games, they're going to be guaranteed X number of spots in the playoff. So we'll see. I don't know.
That's one of the more. I've not had this discussion with a lot of people, but that's definitely one of the more, I think, realistic, especially 2-sided scenarios, because like you did lay out, if Indiana does take another step forward and maybe even knocks on the door to a national championship, not saying they're going to win it, but if you get right on the cusp, that's one of those things where you can hang your hat on that and try to take another step forward in the following season and say, you know what, I can do this at a place like Indiana. But again, if you hit that, theoretical ceiling that we talked about, and then maybe you start thinking, like you said, the age thing, that does become a factor. And there's going to be a lot of people have already thrown out, like, whether it's Florida, any major elite level job, SEC or Big Ten, people think he could walk in there and win a national championship in 1 or 2 seasons.
Yeah. And so that's why I say, I'm not saying he would go in that specific situation. I'm just saying he would give it more consideration at that point. So it's going to be interesting. His name's going to be thrown around a lot unless somebody is a leading candidate for one of those jobs. But yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued by all of that because I think he seems committed to Indiana and wanting to do it there, but you never know. There are a lot of people. I thought Lincoln Riley was committed to Oklahoma, and a few days later he goes to USC. And I thought Brian Kelly was committed to Notre Dame. He goes to LSU. So you never truly know. And so that's why I would say I think you can feel pretty comfortable with Curt Cignetti as your coach, but if Florida makes him a deal he can't refuse.
Last thing I'll say on this, we'll just wrap this up after this, and I don't think this job is going to open, especially now after their big win against Georgia this past weekend. But there was some questions about Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, and with Cignetti being a Saban disciple, I highly believe that Saban would urge Cignetti to take that job were it to open. Obviously, I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. It maybe won't a couple years, but at that point, who knows what's happened with Cignetti already at that point. Either way, wanted to throw that's the real job that worries me if it were to open. Yeah. I don't think it's going to. So Kalen DeBoer, keep doing your thing down with the Crimson Tide. Keep that, that job open or closed.
Well, I was going to say, if that was the case, it theoretically, and we'll probably end on this point, even if that was the case, and say, yep, I got this job at Alabama, I'm going to take it. That's where I want to win. That's where I think I can do great things there. I can win multiple national championships. Man, if you're Indiana, then just hire Kalen DeBoer. You guys, there's a really good football coach who knows how to. He's been there. He's been there. He knows how to win in the Big Ten. He got to the national.
Just don't bring Nick Sheridan with you. Just don't bring Nick Sheridan with you. That's it.
Just do a swap. And is Kane Womack still on his staff?
It's literally right? the top 3 staff is all former Indiana coaches, which is a very wild thing. So
you could just do a little bit of a wife swap there.
All right, Dustin, I appreciate you as always. And of course, real quick, you've got a podcast on YouTube, right? Boiler Banter.
Yes, Boiler Banter podcast on YouTube. You can check out my stuff at si.com/college/Purdue. I know that's not big on the Indiana side, but if there's anything that that might interest you, come on over and check it out.
Dustin's objective. He's very. If you don't know Dustin, you should. He's probably the most. Especially when you gotta separate the fandom, right? Dustin is the most level-headed Purdue fan I've ever come in contact with. So check out everything that he's got going on with Purdue on SI, and hopefully we'll have you on again here soon.
That sounds good. It was a lot of fun, John.
All right. We love having Dustin Schutte on. I know it's been a while since we've had him. Maybe it'll be a little more frequent this time. Between times where we have him on, we'll have to wait and see. But glad to have Dustin Schutte back on the show. All right. Going to make this quick. There was a few things that I was going to get into, and I'll try and mention. Actually, you know what? I can at least mention some of this because some of these I don't want to just leave in the dust. I've got all the things I want to mention on my phone. A lot of these are really quick hitters. First, Mekhi Jackson, no longer on the Indiana football roster. It kind of reminds me when Donovan McCulley last year, whenever he just wasn't getting the playing time that he initially thought he was going to get. I think you're seeing a similar situation with Mekhi Jackson. Also, Mike Gundy fired at Oklahoma State. That's the end of a legend. That's somebody who just wasn't really adapting to the new style of college football, and so he kind of got ran out of town. Things were not going well down in Stillwater early this season. Also, Colorado State buys out of their series with Indiana. The North Texas apparently has replaced Colorado State, and I think understandably so. I think the Rams were kind of just running away from playing the Hoosiers. And who can, let them do, they're doing the same thing Indiana did whenever they got rid of some power opponents on their non-con schedules. They're trying to get as many wins as they possibly can. Speaking of Rams, the Rams defeated the Colts this past weekend, and there was some miscues that kind of, made this an unfortunate loss for the Colts. But that doesn't mean this team still can't make a run to the playoffs. I still think they're a pretty good team, and they're going to get a chance to bounce back against the Raiders later this weekend. So we'll see what goes on for the Colts in that matchup later this weekend, of course. Thomas Bryant, a one-year deal with the Cavs, so he's no longer with the Pacers. Unfortunate for Pacers fans to have the Hoosier on the roster, at least no longer on the roster. And I also saw this today. Miles Turner was doing some bitching with the Milwaukee Bucks, mentioning how he didn't feel like he was appreciated down in Indianapolis. Dude, you were down there for forever. You were kind of the face of the franchise for a long time. And then all of a sudden, you make a run to Game 7 and you come up short and you say something. I don't want to start spinning my wheels and just kind of going off about it. But if you saw what was posted, the quote that he said, it's very disappointing coming from somebody who I feel like was very beloved in Indianapolis for a long time. And then one more thing before we get into non-revs. Nancy Leonard passes away along the same lines as the Pacers, of course. Just a few years removed from when Slick Leonard, the legendary Slick Leonard, passed away. His wife now back with him, and it was a very emotional day for those involved with the Pacers organization whenever that announcement was made earlier this past week. And, of course, sending love and prayers to their family, everyone in the Pacers organization, because without them, the Pacers aren't what they are today. It's just plain and simple. They had to make phone calls. There were so many things back in the day that the Leonard family had to do to make this franchise not necessarily what it is today, but to get it to where it was, to get it to where it is now. I don't know if that sentence made any sense, but I'm sure many of you longtime Pacers fans understand the impact that the Leonards had on the franchise. All right. Final thing. Let's go and get some non-revenue shout-outs, and then we'll call it a night or a day whenever you're listening to this. Indiana men's soccer, kind of like last time, they're trading wins and losses. They lost to Michigan State on the road, 1-0. Followed that up with a win against UCLA, 4-2 at Armstrong Stadium. This week, they'll be in action on Friday at Washington. It's the only game they have left this week. Excuse me. And then that game will be televised on the Big Ten Network. Women's soccer, 2 draws in their most recent matches. 0-0 draw at home against Washington. Followed that up with a 3-3 draw against Oregon. And then this Friday, they'll play Purdue in West Lafayette. And then Indiana women's volleyball getting back their winning ways, beginning the conference slate 2-0 with wins on the road at Northwestern, 3-1, and then sweeping Washington back at home, 3-0. And this Friday, and then on Saturday as well, they'll have a match. They'll have back-to-back matches on the road. Number 17, USC on Friday, and then number 24, UCLA on Saturday. So the back-to-back in Los Angeles for women's volleyball, and we'll see if they can keep things. I mean, they're 11-1 on the season, so a really good start for Indiana women's volleyball. All right, that'll do it for today's show. Hope you guys enjoyed it, even though things look a little bit different today, just slightly, just solo segments. So until next week, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by TheHoosier.com.